Hello and welcome to a new edition of Business Insider. Genetic resources for food and agriculture are the raw materials upon which the world relies to improve the productivity and the quality of domesticated plant and animal populations, as well as to maintain healthy populations of wild species, including those used in forestry and fisheries. Genetic resources are constitutive of biodiversity, commonly understood as the diversity of species that make up an ecosystem, including plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and algae. And tonight we'll be talking about genetic resources and their role in achieving food security. But first, a look at our major news headlines for this past week. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has said that it is necessary to take the initiative to find mechanisms and strengthen governance and seek financial support to address climate change challenges prior to the upcoming UN Climate Change Conference COP28, which is to be held in the UAE in late 2023. This means that all those who are able to do so will contribute, Shoukry added in an interview with CNN. Responding to a question about the capabilities of intensive investments in the decarbonization of energy resource options and the limits of the private sector's relevant participation, Shoukry said he hopes this will happen. He added that the private sector is greatly interested in renewable energy resources. The foreign minister said technology stimulates the private sector to be more involved in specific projects such as those in wind energy or solar power. Commenting on developments of the economic situation, he also said that the Green Hydrogen Initiative that was launched by Egypt in cooperation with Belgium, that Egypt hopes to be a green hydrogen hub. And he added that the Egyptian state is striving to attract investments in the fields of the green economy. And the Minister of International Cooperation, Dr. Rania El-Mashat, said climate change is a global challenge that requires consolidating efforts in promoting commitment to climate action, as well as making the best use of available resources to finance the green transition. El-Mashat was speaking during a session held as part of the World Economic Forum, Davos 2023, to launch an initiative to encourage partnerships between non-profit organizations and the private as well as government sectors to scale up private finance. To achieve the goals of the UN Climate Change Conference, developed nations must deliver on their climate finance commitments, the minister said, adding that this call to action is extremely timely as it builds on the direction set during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, the COP of implementation under the Egyptian presidency. El-Mashat touched upon the Sharm el-Sheikh guidebook for just financing, which brings the idea of justice to climate finance to move from pledges to implementation. And Minister of Irrigation and Water Resources, Hadi Swalem, said his ministry has a national plan that is determined to continue to implement, adding that the state has implemented major projects to rehabilitate canals rather than to just line them. The minister made the remarks during a speech he delivered at a plenary session of the House of Representatives this week. During the session chaired by House Speaker Hanif El-Gibali, Swalem talked about the controls that govern operations to line canals, especially in populated areas. The minister added that the network of canals and drains across the country are 55,000 kilometers long. All right, time now for a short break, and when we come back, we'll be watching together a report about genetic resources and their role in food security, and we'll be introducing you to our distinguished guest here with us in the studio. Please stay with us. All right, you're still watching Business Insider, and with us now here in the studio is Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr, Professor of Plant Genetics and Biodiversity at Helwan University. Dr. Badr, thank you for being with us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Badr.
Thank you for having me on your
Thank
program.
you, sir. And allow us to watch with our dear viewers now a report about genetic resources and their role in achieving food security.
Okay.
Genetic resources for food and agriculture are the raw materials upon which the world relies to improve the productivity and quality of domesticated plant and animals populations, as well as to maintain healthy populations of wild species, including those used in forestry and fisheries. The conservation and sustainable use of genetic resources for food and agriculture is therefore at the core of food security and nutrition. Conserving and using a wide range of diversity, both among species and within species, means securing options to respond to future challenges. The diversity of genetic resources for food and agriculture, aquatic resources, animals, forests, microorganisms, and invertebrates plays a crucial role in meeting basic human food and nutritional needs. It is essential for maintaining and enhancing the efficiency and the resilience of production systems, as well as for healthy diets and the delivery of ecosystem services such as pollination and pest and disease regulation. The Ministry of Agriculture and Land Reclamation in Egypt activated the already existed Plant Genetic Resources Program since 1994. According to the Ministerial Decree number 1920 of 2003, the National Gene Bank was established to be officially responsible for the conservation and maintenance of plant, animal, as well as the microorganisms genetic resources in the agricultural sector in Egypt. The activities of the National Gene Bank represent an emergency tool for safeguarding endangered plant genetic resources to deploy and make available these valuable genetic resources to both public and private breeding and research entities and programs. The National Gene Bank of Egypt was assigned to collect, identify, regenerate, evaluate, conserve, and document the plant, animal, and microorganism genetic resources in the agricultural sector in Egypt. The ministry appointed the NGP to prepare reports on the plant genetic resources to be included in the Global Plan of Action of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. The president of the NGP was selected to represent the Near East region in the governing body of the Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture Treaty. The cold storage facilities of the NGV contains more than 30,000 accessions from the general and species collected from the breeding and research institutions, seed companies, farmers, individuals, international research centers, and from collecting missions.
All right, thank you, Abir Hussein and Rasha Abdel Hamid, for this report back here in the studio with Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr. Dr. Badr, when we say genetic resources and their role in achieving food security, first of all, we want to know the simplest definition for genetic resources, and then the factors that affect food security.
First, genetic resources, as it is named genetics, then the identification is the genetic material, the genes, which are found in plants related to cultivated plants. And these plants are either wild relatives of the cultivated plants or land races. Land races means crops that raised by farmers along years, but it's not developed by professional agricultural institutions. And also it includes some recently developed cultivars and old cultivars. So all forms of plants that includes the genes that can contribute to the development of new crops which is more productive to fulfill the needs of human beings for food security is called genetic resources.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There are many threats to food security, like the increasing population globally, the prices of food and so on.
Yeah.
Talk to us through them, and then we'll go into how can genetic resources and modifications help in achieving
the human population is growing up very fast in these years. And we will be 8 million probably
8 billion,
8 billions in few years. And the land production is not sufficient, will not be sufficient to feed all these population unless the genetic resources are utilized, are used to develop more productive species. And to be more productive, you have to increase the yield, and you can also produce crops that are resistant to diseases, that are that is also able to grow in the future under different climate conditions.
Right.
So the purpose of breeding the new crops is to mainly is to increase yield for sufficient food, but also to take care of resistance to diseases and adaptation to climate change.
Right. I mean, and that's a new factor, I guess, that came in the past few decades.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
when we knew about climate change or because of the
industrialization,
pollution. Yes.
But climate change is also old. It happens in the past.
Yes.
But in our age, it is clear because of the human intervention through many ways to increase the emission of greenhouse gases that cause global warming.
Right. And of course, other factors that could threaten food security include the scarcity of water.
Yes, of course, major important.
Yeah. So how can modified or genetic resources or what they call GMOs?
GMOs. Genetically modified organisms.
Right.
Yeah.
How can this work in light of scarcity of water in some areas?
Genetic engineering is actually used to produce genetically modified organisms, other plants and other organisms as well. But genetic engineering has been more successful in plants than other animals and humans, of course. It's not allowed to engineer humans. But genetic engineering is not the only way to produce more productive crops. Normal breeding can also needed in the future, because genetic engineering, and probably now people talk about gene editing. Gene editing means trying to deal with, to increase the efficiency of the gene to be more active in producing more crops. But genetic engineering is to transfer gene from one species to another species. Both technologies are recent and they can help in producing more food in the future, but we still need to use the old ways of breeding to ensure that the genes are present in the plants and they can be inherited from generation to generation. So genetic engineering will help, but it's not a substitute of the normal practice of plant breeding.
Understood.
Yeah.
There must be different categories for genetic resources, right?
Yes.
Can you talk to us about these different categories?
Yes, land races, cultivars, wild relatives, and farmers raised or old cultivars. These are the categories which are often kept at gene banks. We use the term gene bank because gene bank's responsibility is to collect genetic resources and to keep them for the future, not only as plants, but as seeds, as botanic gardens, as tissue culture. You know, tissue culture means growing them in the laboratories for the future, and even the genes as DNA, because DNA is the material of gene, so we can keep genetic resources as genes. So these are the most common forms that seeds are kept in gene banks, either plants, growing plants in the field, in the botanic garden, or in tissue culture, or genes, and the most common is seeds, because seeds can be kept for much longer time than plants and than tissue culture.
Is it difficult to conserve them? I mean, the methods of conservation for these
yes,
GMOs.
different plants in the botanic garden and the fields are grow. There's no problem. We don't need technology to keep them, but to regenerate them every year. So we regenerate more plants every year.
Is this process, I mean, is the process costly, generally
it's
speaking?
costly, it's very costly, but you know, you keep your food for the future, so you have to pay for this, you have to cover the costs. But genetic resources, when you keep seeds, you need to freeze them. You either keep them in liquid nitrogen, for example, as DNA, or in -20 or -72. These to keep the seeds much longer than in the normal environment, as a normal temperature.
Right.
So we need very cold, large rooms to keep seeds. And we need liquid nitrogen or carbon dioxide ice to keep DNA for the future. So
before we proceed further, Dr. Badr, in the conversation, can I ask you, where is Egypt now from the map of genetic resources globally?
We have a recent gene bank. Unfortunately, we didn't, although we are we've been known as an agricultural country since many thousands of years. We didn't have gene bank unless the 90s.
Yeah, until the 90s.
The 90s, and it was initiated in the Agricultural Research Center, which is a normal place for gene banks. But the facilities and the probability there is very weak, and we must actually give more attention to the gene bank and give more funding for the people working there to gather plants and to keep them and to provide the facilities like cool places, cool rooms and fields to cultivate the plants and train the human being to collect the gene bank and to keep it. We even call it conservation. For conserving these resources in the gene bank, and management, how to manage the gene banks and to exchange with other gene banks around the world, and how to collect more every year, and how to use these gene banks to develop crops. Otherwise, we'll be keeping them like a museum. It's not a museum. It is a source that gives every year new genes for the agriculturists to develop new.
And are we taking steps right now in
we
that
are
direction?
steps, of course. It was too late. It was made late.
Better late than never. Better late than never.
But the colleagues there, I know them very well, and they work hard. In the circumstances they are, but they need more support. They need more land to cultivate. They need some more money to fund establishment and facilities, and they need more to train the personnel working in the gene bank.
They say that the genetic resources utilization supports sustainable development goals.
Yes.
Can you explain to us how?
Because For sustainable development, we need to provide food for everybody. And of course, you know, the 17th goals of the sustainable development of the United Nations. And of course, we in Egypt have the 2030 sustainable development goals in line with the United Nations goal. And the 4 goals of these, no poverty, no hunger, and so on, and good health,
associated with
with good food, and genetic resources are the resources for producing more food. So genetic resources actually support the sustainable development of good health, no hunger and no poverty. So stability, of course, if the people are fed well and are in good health and are in good life, then you will have stability and you will have more progress in the future.
Dr. Badr, there must be concerns as well about especially GMOs, I guess.
Yes, yes.
So talk to us about those concerns.
Unless genetic resources are renewed every year and collected every year. So collections cost money, and the renewal of cultivation and so on costs money. And of course, the climate change may have a serious effect on the genetic resources growing in the wild or growing in the field. These are the concerns about future conservation and management of the genetic resources. Of course, there is some other genetic resources. Genetic resources in Egypt is not only in the gene bank, but universities have genetic resources in the College of Agriculture, and of course some botanic gardens are considered as genetic resources. Some research institutions have also genetic resources, but we need also to do some more management to link these sources with the genetic resources, and so we know how much genetic resources we have and where we have it. Either in Alexandria or in other places or in Aswan, they should be linked to the gene bank of the Agricultural Research Center, and these will give us more idea about what we have from genetic resources.
Certainly, Dr. Badr, genetic resources have an important role in crop improvement.
Yes.
Could you explain to us, I mean, simply, of course, you're a scientist, and so make it simple, as simple as you can, please.
I hope I'm not I'm not speaking a lot of pure science. I will try to make it understand it to the public. To improve crops, we either need to develop crops that is resistant to diseases, more productive, more adaptable to climate changes, and so on. Not only plants, we also need to raise animals because animals are part of the food security as well.
Of course.
So unless we have genetic resources, which are there is something called pre-breeding. Before breeding crops, genetic resources are the pre-breeding material. So we use this material, and from this material we take the genes responsible for the good characters, good productivity, good resistance of the crops, and we introduce these genes to the crops. That's why we increase the productivity of food through developing the new cultivars of the crop plants.
The United Nations FAO studies has a lot of recommendations and has reached also important conclusions. Could you talk to us
The
about
Food and Agriculture Organization is actually one of the United Nations organizations, and is concerned with the food security, agricultural and food security. And in the 60s, there was a problem of insufficient food for feeding the human population. And there was the so-called agricultural revolution by discovering the called dwarfing genes. Dwarfing genes means the plant is dwarf, is small, but gives more yield. You don't need the plant to grow green and use the food and the energy for growing green leaves, but you need it to give more fruits. So these genes conserve the genes for the more production of cereals. The most important is maize, wheat, and barley. And these had made a revolution in increasing the food population in the 60s. And these now we need another revolution in increasing the food for the human being, because the human being are growing faster than the food productivity. So we need to increase the food production by introducing genes to the crops and develop new crops as well to grow the food. We need also to organize the distribution and to organize cooperation between countries and to organize food distribution. And this is the role of the Food and Agriculture Organization, is to help countries develop their own gene banks and to develop their technologies as strategies for improving crop production, and also organize exchange and experience exchange between countries as well. If Egypt is good in cultivating cotton, so the Egyptians will give their experience to other countries in cotton. If other countries have experience in maize, so we will use their experience to improve our maize production. This is the FAO role in the food and agriculture.
Right. And can we say that the crop improvement and the other roles that genetic resources play are environmentally friendly processes, or do they sometimes harm the environment, the process itself?
The process is not environmentally harmful because it does not change anything in the environment. We need fields, we need labs, we need cold places. Not only we, I mean the agricultural institutions and so on. And in the process of producing new cultivars, there is no whatsoever danger to the environment.
I mean, it's totally environmentally friendly.
Yeah, it's totally environmentally friendly.
The climate change poses a threat to the process.
Yes.
How big of a threat does it pose, and what are the proposed solutions?
The climate change will impose serious impact on the agriculture as a whole, and in the genetic resources as well, because some plants growing somewhere, if the rain is not sufficient, the plants will not grow. If the temperature is too high, the plant productivity will be too low. If the salinity in the soil increase, the productivity of the plants will be limiting the growth and yield of the plants. So the solution is to breed plants adaptable to the climate change. So under the climate change, the plants can perform very well and they can produce more food even under the climate change. We use the genes in the genetic resources and introduce the genes to the plants, and these will make plants adaptable to the climate change.
And is it fair to say that as the climate changes and as the average temperature globally increases, then we will have to modify the genetically modified...
Yes. We improve the genetics so the plant's productivity can be improved. And some people think that temperature may not be so harmful for some crops. Some crops grow in high temperature, but temperature will be harmful to plants that grow under low temperature. So we need also to balance our response, the plant response to the environment. We can develop plants that can grow well in hot places and develop plants that grow well under moderate temperature or cold temperature as well. So we need to change that strategies in the future to be to make the plants adaptable to the climate change, even if we need to cultivate in other places and to change our farming system to be adaptable to the climate change.
Understood.
Yeah.
Back to FAO, I mean, I read that FAO says that almost half of the fruit and vegetables produced globally are wasted. I mean, that's a lot. Half.
It's too much.
So
it's much waste.
how can we
wasted,
deal with that and solve this problem?
It may be wasted through storage and the transport. Because vegetables and the foods are very fragile and cannot stay longer unless they are kept in the fridge. And of course, in many places in the world, these facilities are not available for the people, and the fruits and the vegetables may be rotten or wasted. For this,
so does GMO play a role here in trying to limit the waste?
Most waste comes after harvest. Because when the fruits are and the vegetables are grown in the field, it's okay. But if you harvest them, you have to use them either to use them very soon, not to keep them for a long time, or to keep them in places that make their shelf life longer. So there are some genes that makes shelf life too long. For example, tomato cannot live outside the fridge for a
Everybody
week.
knows that.
For a week. But
you don't need to be a scientist.
But now there are some genes that keep tomatoes fresh for 2 or 3 weeks. This is important, of course, for the transport of vegetables and fruits from Asia to America or from Africa to America. That takes long time in ships. So increasing shelf time is important for reducing the waste.
It seems not only important, it seems of utter importance. I mean, according to this statistic,
it seems a necessary.
Vegetables and fruits
it seems a
are
necessary.
wasted.
So one of the important investigations and research is oriented to increasing shelf time. But increasing shelf time without reducing the productivity of the crop or the quality of the fruit as well. So you know the story of you need tomato to stay longer in the shelf with the same taste, not with different taste, as we know. But research has done very well in this, and I hope in the future the waste will be minimized, because
it's a must, Dr. Badr, as it seems.
Otherwise, other people would not have fruits and vegetables to eat.
Indeed, indeed. So on that note, we've come to the end of this episode. Dear viewers, on behalf of you, we thank you very much. Dr. Abdel Fattah Badr, Professor of Plant Genetics and Biodiversity at Helwan University. Always a great pleasure to have you, and always a great pleasure to listen to you. Thank you, Dr.
It's my pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Badr. And thank you, dear viewers, for watching us. Next week, same time, is a new edition of Business Insider. Please stay with Nile TV International. Goodbye.